Have you ever had a dream that made you feel shattered or made you mad at somebody that you really shouldn't have been mad at? Have you ever wondered like what your subconscious is actually trying to say in your dreams? Well, you don't want to miss today's episode because we are talking with Johns Hopkins University professor of psychology, Dr. Dylan Selterman, and he's going to talk to us about dreams and what is it that our dreams are trying to tell us. He also runs the Dream Lab. So you don't want to miss what he has to say because he is going to tell us all about dreams, what they mean scientifically, whether or not we should interpret them spiritually, and everything you want to know about dreams. So buckle up and let's see what he has to say. Thank you so
Mhm.
much for coming on. And
Sure.
I'm so excited to talk to you because I mean, dreaming is something that I mean, you're a professor of psychology at Johns Hopkins, and you run something called the Dream Lab, which I'm so excited for you to tell us all about what that is and what kind of work you've been doing. And I know you did this prior to even getting to Johns Hopkins, where I think you were at University of Maryland. Was that?
Correct. Yes, I was there for over 10 years.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background so that everybody knows.
Sure. Yeah. Well, my research background is as a social and personality psychologist. So, in addition to studying dreams and interpersonal relationships, I also study moral psychology, politics, well-being, a bunch of things. I teach a variety of courses, including the psychology of happiness and well-being. I teach an intro to psychology course in the summer, and I also have a seminar in social attraction and relationship development. And I teach a course also on political psychology as well. So my interests are pretty varied.
Yeah.
I have a bunch of irons in the fire. Um, what
I
else can I
think I
tell
need
you
to
about
take all
me?
those courses. I'd love
Well,
all.
we are offering more of our courses online for students who are not on campus. So if anyone is interested, feel free to reach out and I can send you more information on that.
Wow, that's fantastic. I was a minor in psychology. So I took a lot of psychology classes, but unfortunately, I didn't take some of those great courses. So that sounds kind of interesting to me. But okay, so
We try to inspire students to be lifelong learners. So even after they graduate, they can still read up and take more courses and get into it.
I love it. I love it. So now you're a professor at Johns Hopkins, and you obviously teach many of those courses. And so, but you also run something called the Dream Lab. What is the Dream Lab?
Well,
I want to go there.
the Dream Lab is just a playful acronym for the research that I do in social and personality psychology. I actually run many of my studies are run just online where participants can participate virtually. And then I also have some participants come in and do things in the lab. Like, for example, my colleague Jeff Bowen and I are running a study where we ask participants to come in and report what they normally see in their social media feeds in real time. And then I have other projects, like, for example, looking at people's dreams, but those are done with diary methods. So we have participants come into the lab and instruct them on how to keep a daily record of their dreams and then send them back out into the world. And then they fill out their diaries for a couple of weeks and then report back to us.
Okay, so it's not like people are all snoozing in your lab and you've got them connected to something and you're
Right.
something out of
Yeah, I
that
said
matrix. Yeah.
we don't have the resources for a sleep lab. That's true.
That's true. Well, I mean, because it's very interesting because in the research that I was doing about what you do, t when we think about dreams, a lot of people think about what is the spiritual meaning of a dream, and
Mm,
that's not
yeah,
really what. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not really what you look more at dreams more from a scientific perspective. Is that correct?
correct. Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah, and you're right that dreams are very spiritual and people often derive a lot of meaning and insight from their dreams, in addition to the kind of wackiness and bizarreness that we sometimes see in our dreams. But yeah, my research is about trying to apply a scientific lens to understanding people's dreams. So we're looking at things that anyone would be able to look at and say, this is clearly in the dream. So who's there? Who are the other characters? What are they doing? What is the dreamer reporting that they're doing and feeling and thinking inside of the dream? What is the situation they're in? Are they at work? Are they at school? Are they hanging out with friends? Are they, playing sports or video games or music or whatever it is? And then we look for correlations between those things. So the extent to which people have dreams where they're hanging out with their friends or their romantic partners, their family members, how are those things associated with personality traits, things like attitudes toward relationships, well-being, insecurity, that kind of thing.
Well, speaking of that, I mean, I have so many questions, but now that you've mentioned that, you did a pretty big study on, I think, more of like an infidelity study in dreams. Tell us what that was about because that's pretty insightful.
That's right. We didn't know exactly how often this was going to appear. I had a hunch that we would see some dreams about infidelity, and indeed, that was kind of an impetus to do the study in the first place, just based on some experiences that I had. There's a saying in psychology that research sometimes is me search, and I definitely so in college I dated someone who she had chronic negative dreams about me, like infidelity dreams where I was cheating on her all the time or betraying her in some way. And I thought, oh, there's got to be something here. So, and my
You weren't.
academic, no, I was not. No, I was not. But my academic mentors at the time were relationship psychologists who had more expertise in that area. So we put it together and said, let's do research on relationships and dreams. And yeah, so we had a little over 60 people participate. They filled out the dream diaries for a couple of weeks, and then we looked at the kinds of things that they reported having in dreams. One of them was infidelity, both their own infidelities and dreaming about their partner's infidelities. And sure enough, we found that people who are more insecure in their attachment styles also were more likely to have dreams where their partners were cheating on them. And then, just in terms of day to day effects, we also found that when people have a dream where their partner's cheating, they report less intimacy the following day. So there's kind of a day to day effect and also a kind of personality traits effect.
That's interesting because, and that's so correct because I can say something personally about myself. Um, I have had a dream not too long ago about my boyfriend cheating on me. And so I was so mad at him the next day. And he's like, I didn't even do anything. I was like, I don't want to talk to you. It was so real. You were cheating. Anyway, I have had my ex-husband, we're divorced because he was cheating. So
Mm,
I have an insecurity about that. So it's
right.
carried over into my other relationship even long after it happened. But I think so you think there's something subconscious that lives within you that sometimes manifests in your dreams. That
Yeah, and it's interesting that you use the word subconscious. I think we are aware of our dreams. I actually wrote a piece, an essay for Psychology Today, where I argue that I think dreams are actually they're conscious experiences rather than subconscious. We just happen to have them while we're asleep instead of while we're awake. But when you're in your dream, you're operating as if you're awake. So there's really more similarity there than difference. Something subconscious, I guess, would be like blinking or breathing where we're not really thinking about it as we're doing it. It's just kind of operating in the background. But
right.
yes, to your point, I think that those types of experiences in relationships are associated with the content of people's dreams.
Do you find that we can that that I know you said this in a TED talk. You said that people should pay attention to their dreams, um,
Yeah.
and that our dreams are trying to tell us something. that they can be trying to tell us something. Because a lot of people just shove it off as, you know, as a dream. It was, you know, it was nothing. I don't know why I dreamt this. It was a crazy dream. I had the weirdest dream. And some dreams are really weird, like, you know, things
Yeah.
that could never happen. Like, you know, you could dream of something like, you know, riding in, you know, some kind of crazy animal like through a forest, and you never would really do that. But
Right.
why does your
Right.
brain make up crazy stuff like that? Like, where does that come
Yeah.
from?
I have a lot to say about this. So first of all, the extent to which people have bizarre dreams, I think, is overestimated because we don't take a proper record of our dreams day to day. And so we tend to forget most of it. And then the really bizarre stuff stands out. And then we think, oh, well, all my dreams are bizarre. But the thing is, and I find this is true when I tell my participants to start keeping a dream log, then after a few days they realize, huh, most of my dreams are actually pretty ordinary. You know, they're just most of the time I'm just doing regular stuff that I would ordinarily do. And then there's some bizarre elements that are kind of sprinkled in, but even those can be traced back to other things in the environment. Like if you had a dream about riding a dragon, well, maybe you watched Game of Thrones before going to sleep, and
Exactly.
then
Yeah.
that comes into your dream. So most of the time, the reason it feels bizarre is because, like you said, you're not normally doing that kind of stuff, or maybe you're never going to do it. But there's something in your life that you can connect it to, and maybe it's science fiction and fantasy that you're reading or watching, or something that is in the environment that's making its way in. So this is what we would call the continuity hypothesis of dreams, that most of the time our dreams contain elements that we experience while we're awake. And in terms of what dreams can tell us, I think, there is the possibility of something insightful from dreams. Um, sometimes it's more like we're working through something and it's difficult or tricky, but our dreams are kind of helping us to do that. I really like this idea from some of Bob Stickgold's research. He's a colleague of mine at Harvard Med School. He studies dreams and sleep, and he says that, when you're asleep, your mind is kind of working it out. So you're playing around with ideas, maybe with an element of creativity, like, oh, let's take this element from childhood and an element from your work, your job, and then your personal life, and we'll just throw it all together and see if it makes sense. Most of the time it doesn't, and your
Doesn't.
mind throws it, and your mind throws it away. But then there might be some nuggets that are more insightful, and you're free to do whatever you want in your dreams. So it's kind of like, let's just go nuts for a bit, and then maybe something good will come out of it, and we'll take it with us after we wake up.
Because I know a lot of times when I've had dreams, I can go, okay, well, I dreamt about like I made a big pot of tabbouleh not too long ago. I had tabbouleh in my dreams for like I was feeding people tabbouleh. Well, of course I could say I did that because I made tabbouleh. All of a sudden now I'm feeding the hungry tabbouleh. That was just kind of like, but I can definitely look sometimes and go, okay, I that's what I did yesterday, and now it came up in my dream. But then there's times where you end up having a dream that like a place, like I can tell you there's a place in that I a reoccurring dream I've often had. I've never
Mm,
been to this place. This place shows up in my dream. In this, my mother passed away 6 years ago through a mistaken surgery, and she was having a heart valve repaired, and accidentally she passed away, or the doctor accidentally cut her right coronary. Anyway, she passed away. Since then, I have felt a lot of guilt about my that I didn't tell my like I had a feeling my mother shouldn't have gone to the hospital that morning. I think she should have canceled the surgery. And
mm,
I never did anything. I never said anything because, I thought, oh, my intuitions might be off and I'm just scared for her. Anyway, it didn't go well. But since she passed away, I have a lot of dreams about my mom in different places. But there's a place that in my dream I go to it. There's a bridge. It's almost like a
mm,
monastery that she lives in my dream. And I've never been to this place, but it's reoccurred so many times. And it's a very humble, modest place with wood paneling, and the beams of light come through. And if I go over that
Mm,
bridge, I get to see my mom. It's weird. And I
mm,
often think, where does that place come from? People, or a
yeah.
deja vu where you've gone to somewhere and I've been to this place before. Why do I know that? Do you have any research on that kind of stuff? Or
That's really interesting. I can say that I've also had just personally many dreams of the afterlife and communicating with the dead. And there are places that emerge in the context of that, which are, like you're describing, kind of simple. I know that I haven't been there in my life, but they appear in that context. So I think, this is we don't really have a scientific explanation for this. It could be that, there's something symbolic about death and the unknown. So here's, someone really close to you that's important to you that has passed on, and now you're trying to figure out where they are. And in your dream, it's manifesting in a place that you don't actually know. So that could be the kind of cognitive association that's happening there. But like I said, we really don't have a scientific explanation for that just yet.
and right, and because you might, and when you look at that scenario, and you might be talking, I'm sure you have talked to people who think, though, that's very symbolic. Like, you're looking at more from a scientific perspective, but then you've got spirituality people who might think, oh, that bridge means this, or that wood paneling means this, and or a rabbit may have come, that kind of stuff. What do you say about that kind of research or
Yeah, there's all kinds of dream interpretation books
interpretation?
and
Yeah.
in dream encyclopedias where it's, if you have a dream about a bridge and it means this, and if you see a rabbit in your dream, then it means that, and an ocean means this. Um, and what I would say to that is it's first of all, it's not crazy to try to figure out what those associations are, like what those things actually mean. And there's a history in psychology of trying to do this. This was, going back to Freudian psychoanalysis. The idea was that we could try to figure out what the latent content of dreams actually means.
Right.
The issue that we run into is that for different people, they have associations with those things that are different. So, for example, if you I don't know, were attacked by a rabbit when you were a kid, like that you're going to have a different association with that animal than someone who wasn't. So if the rabbit appears in your dream, then there's not one meaning that's universal for everyone. It's more like, what do you associate with that? And so any specific thing that manifests, whether it's a place or a situation or an animal or a person,
Mhm.
is really going to be specific to you. It's going to be, your mental representation of that thing is what really matters. And so, what I would say to someone who wants to understand, well, I had a dream about this thing. What does it mean? I would explore that more in depth for that individual person. Like, what is your personal history with this? And then try to understand it from there.
That's very interesting. Because like when you said a certain animal, I was thinking about a crow, because
Hmm,
people are afraid of crows. I actually think they're kind of cute, and I think they're smart.
right,
And I actually
right,
don't
right,
find them to be the raven from Edgar Allan Poe. I find them to be, they don't represent death to me. But to most people, if you have a crow in your dream, or if you see even a crow and you're with someone, they're like, oh, I can't stand crows. So you're right. So if you dream, I dreamt about a crow, I might be thinking,
right.
oh, that's a good sign. But if somebody else dreamt about a crow, they're like, death is coming.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great example. And the same is true for people. If you are having a dream about a specific person, your relationship to that person is what matters in terms of figuring out what that really means for your dream. But a different person who has a different type of relationship with that same individual, it means something different for them, and the relationship means something different.
Yeah, it's so this it's very I'm so excited that we're talking about this, because I've often wondered how much of your dreams, because we don't know enough about the brain, right? Scientists are always studying the brain. They say, what if we use like part of our brain, not all of our brain. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's that
We
saying.
we do use all of our brain.
Okay,
That's
isn't
one.
there some saying
Yeah.
about that you don't use there's so much of your brain you don't use? Um,
Definitely scientists did not come up with that. Somebody did, but it was not a neuroscientist who came up
well,
with that.
whoever came up with it, it's certainly been sticking in the out there in the world. But the
Yep.
point is, we still don't know a lot about the brain, and in even like researching when people die, and they say that they've seen this big light, and they've maybe seen God or they've seen loved ones that have passed. A lot of scientists will say that's just a chemical process that the brain goes through when they're deprived of oxygen and a person is dying. But then there are religious people, spiritual people will say, no, 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 that's actually what's happening. You're transitioning into another another plane or another planet or another, world.
Sure. Yeah.
So the brain, I think when you study like dreams, it must be so fascinating to like really dive deep into what's going on in the mechanism.
Yeah, I agree. And being that I'm not a neuroscientist myself, there's not much else that I can comment on in terms of brain stuff. But I agree with you that it's really great to kind of dive into what's happening in people's dreams and what that might mean for the big questions in life.
Right, right. You said something in your TED talk about Paul McCartney. Uh,
Mm.
yeah, can you explain that? Because I thought that was really cool. Like, again, paying attention to your dreams. Paul McCartney clearly did, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, the legend goes that he dreamt the song yesterday and then woke up and wrote it down and played it, and it became this really beautiful classic song. And I give that as an example of a phenomenon that I think is very prevalent in terms of people drawing inspiration from their dreams. Anecdotally, we also see evidence that, for example, computer scientists and engineers will sometimes dream in code. So they're seeing like the equations and the symbols in their dreams. I've had dreams myself where I'm kind of working on a manuscript or something, and I'll wake up and there will be something in there maybe that I can use. And so, yeah, people do dream about things that are relevant to what they're working on or what they're passionate about, or something that's driving them in their life.
And when we think about dreams, a lot of times people will say, I don't remember my dreams. Like, I can't, like,
Mm.
my father does that a lot. And where I say, I've dreamt about mom a lot and I think about her, and he said, she's never come to visit me. And I said, Dad, do you remember your dreams? And he's like, no, I don't remember I don't have dreams. Like, so why do some of us remember our dreams and some of us don't remember our dreams?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, I can say for sure that everyone has dreams, except for the, perhaps rare person with a brain disorder that doesn't have any dreams, but that's extremely rare. And for those people who say they don't remember their dreams, one thing that we can point to is individual differences in sleep. So I remember having a conversation years ago with somebody who told me the same thing as your dad. Oh, I never have dreams. And I say, well, how are you sleeping? And then he goes, oh, I never sleep. So, of course, you're not going to remember dreams if your sleep isn't that good.
Right.
And
Oh, that's why.
unfortunately, Americans are not very good sleepers. So we tend to, I think, just in the same way as we dismiss or disregard our dreams, we also don't take sleep very seriously either. And we keep ourselves awake too much throughout the 24-hour day. And that does predict whether people will fail to remember their dreams as if they're not sleeping well. And then aside from that, I'll give a couple of other little things that predict dream recall. One is simply the intention to remember dreams. So when people have a mental intention to remember their dreams, then they tend to remember them better. And just getting into the habit of, making it part of your daily life. Like as soon as you wake up, just grab the piece of paper and a pen next to your bed and just write it down. And then you're kind of training yourself to, as soon as you wake up, to jot down whatever was in your mind, and then the memory becomes easier. A lot of time people don't do that because they just go right to their phone and start scrolling.
Yeah,
And I,
I'm
you know,
guilty.
I and that's going to impede memory because you're kind of telling your brain, forget about all that other stuff that was just there, focus on this new thing. And also people have dreams throughout the night, so it can be a little bit disruptive if you're waking up with a dream at 3 or 4 a.m. To try to write it down in full. And then, if you go back to sleep, there's no way you're going to remember it when you wake up. I go through that all the time where I wake up in the middle of the night with a dream and I'm like, oh, that was so cool. I'm definitely going to remember it. Nope.
And you
Nope.
don't remember it, and you wish you had to
Nope.
get up, turn the light on, write it down, but who's gonna do that, right?
Right, right, right. Yeah, I mean, we have a culture of waking up early and getting to business, and that does impede our ability to remember dreams.
Well, I've got this now. I wear the
Mm.
Aura ring, so I know exactly now how much REM I'm getting, how much deep sleep I'm getting. I
Ah,
think we're all a little bit obsessed, or a lot of people are obsessed with these kind of gadgets now, right?
mm,
But it does help you sleep better, and I think it makes you more aware of bad sleep habits, where it's give
right.
do you wear anything like this or have any of these gadgets for sleep?
I had a sleep tracker and I noticed that it wasn't working accurately. Like it had me asleep when I knew I wasn't asleep and then awake
Oh,
when I knew I wasn't awake. So I stopped paying attention to it myself, but there's probably better ones. I haven't tried the ring that you just shared.
it's
I
really
have never
good.
tried that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think you would really I have not found that it's had many mistakes on it. Clearly you can get obsessed with it a little bit. Well,
Yeah.
it'll tell you you had a good sleep. You think you feel like you've had a great sleep when I say you really didn't. I'm like, wait a minute, I feel
Right.
like I had a good sleep. So yeah, you can argue with it a lot. So it can be,
Right.
but I think a lot of people are now more aware of their sleep because of things like this, and knowing that it's very important to have sleep.
Sure. Sure.
Um,
There's an interesting finding. Something is called placebo sleep. If you tell people that they've had a good night's sleep, they feel more refreshed. And so it's kind of the power of suggestion sometimes. So
yeah.
yeah, I think I hear what you're saying about people taking it very seriously and getting into the data, but I would argue there's also a benefit to just believing that you've had a good night's sleep, and then you can kind of go about your day more easily.
So when you back to your dream to the dream lab and people taking when you have your students or um, people writing down these dreams. Let's say I wrote down all my dreams for a month and I gave them to
Yeah.
you. What do you do with them then? What is like
Mm.
what do you look at? Like what is it that we're going to now dive into about that journal?
Right, right. So in the studies that I do now, we ask people, in addition to writing down their dreams, we also ask them to fill out, for example, on a 1 to 7 scale, how much joy did they feel, how much anxiety did they feel, how much anger did they have, who was in the dream. So it's not just the dream itself, but my participants are telling us a lot about what's going on in their dreams. And so they're giving us all of the information that we need. For the other study that you mentioned that was more focused on interpersonal relationships, we did use what's called a coding scheme where we try to go through the dream itself and see what kind of story it tells us. And we give it a score for attachment security that is very similar to the system that we have for scoring the narratives that people come up with while they're awake. So that was actually my dissertation project, is looking at the correlation between those things. So it turns out that when you look at the stories people tell about their relationships while they're awake, the more secure people tend to have stories that are more focused on support and positive interactions with their caregivers, including parents or significant others. And that same pattern manifests in people's dreams too. So people tend to have more secure dreams when those people appear in them, if they tell better stories while they're awake. And that, I mean, that is a very time consuming and kind of cumbersome
Yeah.
process to go through all those dreams. It was a huge project. It took 5 years from start to finish, the time we had it ready for publication. So now I'm trying to see what more I can just squeeze out of participants first before they give us the diaries. And now I have to say it's become easier in that regard, but it's also become a little bit more challenging because I have found that especially the college students who are my main participants, they don't recall dreams as easily as they used to, and will report to me that they're struggling with it. I think also because they're not sleeping well, but all in addition because they're kind of as soon as they wake up, they just go right to their phones and they forget all their dreams. But I think there's something going on here. I think that is actually one of the reasons why young people might have less happiness or maybe more distress than 20 or 30 years ago. That this is my pet theory. I don't have any evidence of this, but I think
Right.
that it's connected to sleep and dreams somehow.
You talk about a lot about, I mean, happiness and mindfulness and those kinds of things as well. That the word mindfulness is kind of a pretty general word that people use. And quite frankly, I'm not 100% sure what it means. What do you think? What is
Right.
mindfulness?
Yeah, that's great. I agree completely.
What
I
is it?
guess, yeah, the way that researchers try to measure mindfulness is kind of all over the place. And I tell my students I'm a little bit skeptical of the research on mindfulness. I think it's easier to study something like meditation because you can just ask people, to follow a protocol where they sit and they pay attention to their breathing for 20 minutes a day or something like that, and that's actually easier to do than to ask people whether they're mindful or not, because I don't think the average person really understands what that means. I think so. Part of the way that I learned, what mindfulness is really about is the extent to which you're not kind of letting your mind getting carried away by stuff that's not going on right in the here and now. And this happens all the
Being in the
time. And
present. It's more about being in the
yeah,
present.
if you're kind of you're in the shower and you're having a conversation in your head with somebody else, and then you're driving and you're thinking about a billion other things, and that's your mind is wandering. So I guess mindfulness, I guess, would be the opposite of mind wandering. But that doesn't mean, I think sometimes people mistake mindfulness for just always living in the present. You can be mindful in recalling memories about the past and predicting the future and planning for the future. I think those can be very mindful processes. I think the way in which we lose mindfulness is by kind of letting our mind go in a million directions, and it's kind of chaotic.
Right. Yeah, because oftentimes you're listening to someone speak and you're not really computing what they're saying because you're thinking of something else like that you
Right.
have to do or yeah, so that's so do you how do you use mindfulness in what you do, like what you teach, what you do on a daily basis there?
Right. Well, I do practice meditation myself, just personally in my own life, and I do it with students a little bit, although Um, I mean, I used to have a meditation group that this was before COVID. We met in person every week. I haven't done that in a few years, but I have in some of the classes that I teach, we'll do a little bit of meditation together, especially my happiness class. We'll just sit for a little bit in class so that they can kind of get a feel for it.
Wait, hold on.
Um,
You have
yeah,
a happiness class. Who
I
doesn't want to
do.
take that?
But yeah, we touch on all these topics. We talk about sleep, and we talk about mindfulness and relationships and all that stuff.
That's so great. Had no idea that, that schools were teaching things like this now. I've been out of school for quite a while. So it's just
Yeah.
it's very cool that it's come to a place where you're working on yourself. Like like you can take classes that really help you in your daily life, um,
Yeah.
internally.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, that's
Although I
fantastic.
do I do tell my students as they're thinking about, like you said, kind of working on themselves and and focusing on self-care and self-improvement. Um, Focusing on helping others is perhaps the best way to achieve that. So one of the things we talk about is the happiness benefit from being kind to others, being pro-social. This could include, buying gifts for people, or, just doing positive and pro-social things like volunteering. So it's funny because I think a lot of people might associate self-improvement or self-focus with being selfish, like it's in the name, selfish, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and I and I, I really try to steer my students toward thinking more broadly than that, to think about other people that are important to them and their relationships with others, and being pro-social.
Well, when you say relationships too, I know a lot of the studies that you've done have been on relationships, right? And
Yep.
so, not just the infidelity study, but you also have done research on what our dreams mean to our relationships, and
Yep.
um, that I find that to be like romantic dreams and things like that. Like, what have you found that how the studies of the what have you found the conclusions of some of those studies?
Yeah, well, one of the findings that came from the same study I mentioned, this was my big dissertation project from a while ago, was that when people have relationships that are generally going well, so when people feel highly satisfied and they are committed to their relationships, they tend to have, more positive interactions with their partners in their dreams. And also that when people have a dream in which they have sex with their partner, they feel more love and connection, more intimacy the next day if the relationship's going well. If it's
Right.
not going well, then the love and intimacy the next day is worse. And we don't know exactly why that is, but it could be because there's evidence from other studies that when people are in good relationships, the sex is better.
Mhm.
So it could be that the sex was unfulfilling or unsatisfying in their dream, and that's why they're feeling less intimacy. But we don't know. This is just a bit of speculation. I think it would be nice to do a follow-up study on that.
I think you talked about morality too, like, and deception, those kinds of feelings. Like, sometimes dreams, like if you are a cheater and you have been out cheating, and then you come home and have a dream that you facing your morality, and you're kind of like, oh wow, I really shouldn't have done that, or that was a really bad thing for me to have done. I mean, what does that tell you? Like, is there a morality like connection between what we're doing when we're awake and what we're thinking when we're asleep or in our dream?
Yeah, good question. But that's something we did not look at in my research so far, is I guess moral conflict in dreams, and how people are kind of trying to reconcile that. That is something that my research has looked at in other contexts, not necessarily dreams, but how people kind of go about their relationships and maybe even try to morally justify what they're doing if they believe that infidelity is bad and wrong and we shouldn't do it, but then they're going and doing it. And there's,
Yeah.
I mean, people are very good at, I guess, what we would call moral licensing, where they feel like they're kind of giving themselves permission to misbehave. And there's a whole, array of reasons why people might do that. In the context of relationships, some people might misbehave just because they feel like their partner's misbehaved. And they'll say that too. They'll say, I cheated because I was angry at my partner for something they did, and I wanted revenge, so to speak. So
Or I
yeah,
think they're
that's
doing it, so I'm gonna go and do it, and guess what? I also had a dream that they're doing it, so I'm just gonna go misbehave myself.
right. Yeah.
What is one of the because you've been doing this for a long time, are there any stories or any, like, is there something that sticks out in your mind that maybe you even talk about in your TED Talk that, that has been a fascinating fact about what your research has taught you, or anything that,
Mm.
that a conclusion that you've come to that's kind of fascinating, or interesting that people would want.
Yeah. Well, okay, so going back to the dream stuff, there's one thing that I like to share with people because I feel like this is such an underappreciated aspect of dreams, which is that they are very social. Dreams are social in the sense that most of the time we're dreaming about other people and our relationships with those people. Most of the time we dream about people who are familiar to us that we're close with,
Mm,
our friends and our partners and our family members. And there's something really important about that. The dreams we have are about our relationships, and we still don't know exactly why. There is some evidence in in other fields that there's a connection between interpersonal relationships and sleep. So for and with the animal research, there's looser ethics. So they can do, for example, experiments where they separate rats from their families and then see, how they're functioning. And sure enough, rapid eye movement sleep is impaired when there's relationship separation or conflict.
wow.
And the inverse is true if we look at correlational data with infants and caregivers. We see that in cases where there's disrupted attachment patterns, there's also poor sleep in terms of sleep quality and sleep duration. So there's something going on there in terms of the connection between relationships and rapid eye movement and dreams. Like I said, we're still not sure exactly what's going on there, but it's true that if you look at dreams, if you look at the content that people report, dreams are very, very social, and we should not neglect that.
That's really interesting. And you talk about rapid eye movement because I had someone on the podcast the other day that she's a PhD. She's one of the experts in EMDR therapy.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know much about EMDR therapy.
I've heard of it. I don't know much, but I've heard of
They
it. Yeah.
use they use to try to get rid of traumatic events and things. Um, they to try to heal you, they use rapid eye movement. Like they'll have you move your eyes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And they realize there's something. The doctor that actually kind of invented EMDR, she noticed that it was a connection to REM, to how the dream state, like for that rapid eye movement, she started realizing that if you consciously move your eyes back and forth or tap or you do certain things, you can actually tap into your memory bank and try to change
Okay.
traumatic events and things. So it's interesting when you try to tie in the dream world or try to tie in REM, because that is when we dream, right? During rapid eye movement.
We do dream in non-rapid eye movement sleep as
Ah,
well,
okay.
there's a different quality of dream. So dreaming tends to be more detailed and vivid and movie-like during rapid eye movement sleep. And then, we also have dreams during non-rapid eye movement sleep as well, but with lesser frequency and with less detail.
For you personally, when you think of as a scientist and as an academic, when you think of what you do on a daily basis, do you personally dive in or delve into the spiritual part of dreams? Is there anything that you've questioned now that you've been in a scientific way, always looking at these things? Has there been anything that's made you go, there might be a connection to a otherworldly connection?
Uh, I wouldn't say so. I think in my own personal life, I do entertain that a little bit. Like mentioned earlier, I have had some dreams about the afterlife and communicating with the dead and my ancestors and things like that. I don't. There hasn't been a connection with my academic scientific work. I think that's more just something personal for me. That being said, we know from other studies that people do derive a sense of spiritual insight and meaning from their dreams. So that connection is clearly there, at least in people's minds. What it tells us about the world, I don't know that we can say much about that. There's been all kinds of theories since, forever,
Yeah.
about this the spiritual nature of dreams. And for another example would be Carl Jung's theory of the collective subconscious, this idea that we were all kind of tapping into something greater than ourselves through our dreams. There's not that much that we can say about that from a scientific perspective, because there's no study that is corroborating any of those ideas, but they are fun to think about.
They really are, and sometimes, I love it that you're so you're into the science part of all of this, and you're also very open, because a lot of time people who are scientists are not open to thinking of things in a spiritual realm as well, right? But I do think it's something that most people probably go to as a dream interpretation rather than looking at dreams um, in more of a scientific way. I think
Sure.
generally speaking, people are more thinking like, "Oh, I had this dream, and what does it mean? Can you interpret it
Right.
for me?" You know,
Right.
interestingly enough, I was on using Chat GPT one day, and I had this dream. I think it was the one I was telling you about where this place comes up, and when you ask Chat GPT about could you interpret this, it's basically saying it can't, because
Mm,
it's very scientific. It's like humans have made these things up to make them feel better, that yes, there might be something beyond, but we have no scientific evidence thus far to say that it's true, right? No one's ever come back other than perhaps Jesus, but you know,
mm,
is to tell us like in all these billions of years. So it's
yeah.
it's interesting.
Yeah, well, it sounds like ChatGPT got it right, and it doesn't sound like that it hallucinated there in its response to you. So
Yeah, it
that's
was.
encouraging.
Yeah, and so I have to tell you too, like, this is really an kind of interesting today, I guess. My mother's birthday is today, and
Mm,
she would have been 87 today. And like I said earlier, I have this deep connection and guilt still because I wished I would have told my mom not to go for surgery that day. But last night I had a dream. I woke up like really not feeling great. I ended up crying. Have you ever had dreams where they're so intense that you really feel like you were there? It
sure.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
last night I had a dream that I was at my mom and dad's house, and that someone had told, I don't know who this person was, but had pulled me aside to say your mother died a couple days ago, and he showed me her body, and I was trying to revive her in my dream. Like I'm pounding
Mm,
on her chest, and he's like, "There's no use. She's been gone for a couple of days, it appears." But that's not how my mom died. She died in the
right.
hospital. But
Yeah.
last night, for some reason, and I know I remember, I was thinking it was her birthday today, and that it might be a bit hard for me today, and I might be sad, of course. But that dream was weird because it was all this maybe. So when I asked you about subconscious too, was it maybe in my mind? I was like, I wished I could have saved her. So last night in my dream, I'm trying to revive
Yeah.
her.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. If you're thinking about ways in which you could help the person, and you couldn't in real life and in the dream, and that's kind of the parallel between those things is your feeling of wanting to help and not being able to. And I'm sorry that you experienced that, and I think that definitely makes sense as a parallel.
Yeah, so you can dive into your dreams and make sense sometimes as to why your these things are happening, whether it's the infidelity thing, whether it's, something like this with my mom where I'm still grieving and still mourning and
Sure.
still wishing. So sometimes dreams can come out in that way too. Things maybe you haven't thought about for a while, or things that all of a sudden someone pops in your head you haven't thought of in a while. Like, do you find a
Yeah.
lot of your
Yeah.
students have had things like that occur?
Well, yes, and I think, because they're mostly young adults in my research who participate, I think they're also having a lot of dreams about the kinds of, regular interactions they have with their friends, and, because especially because university life is so focused on the community, and people's dreams are very focused on activities that they do with their friends in their daily lives. And yeah, sometimes you have those kinds of vivid dreams about intense things that are very deep and emotional and powerful. um, so yeah, everyone that I've talked to about dreams will say at some point they've had a dream like that.
Yeah, I love what you do, and I think it's so fascinating. And you also have a podcast.
Yeah, that's true. It's actually on hiatus now. I
Oh,
really want to get back into the podcasting world because I miss it, and I just love having the conversations with people and getting in to experience fun conversations like this one. So I hope to get back into that world soon. Anyone can go check out the episodes we have. A bit more complicated is the podcast name, wherever you get your podcasts, and yeah, we'll keep those up forever.
well, you need to get back into it. I really think you should. I mean, I took a hiatus for a while and then I got back into it again, and I really love it. It's just fascinating to get into other people's worlds and hear what other people are doing. And I handpick everybody that I want to talk to because it interests
Yeah.
me. But and then you've got a TED Talk. So what is your TED Talk about so people know, and can they look at it on YouTube?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can search for it. I forget the exact title, but it's like, what can we learn from our dreams? TEDx UMD. I also write for Psychology Today. My column is called The Resistance Hypothesis. So people can go check that out as well. I have a bunch of I have some articles on dreams and relationships, infidelity, well-being, political psychology, all kinds of stuff.
So great. Well, thank you so much for being on my podcast. I'm so grateful to have
It's
had
my
you.
pleasure.
It was so
Thanks for
insightful.
having me.
And thank you so much for everything that you said and all the work that you're doing. Keep it up. And also, anybody who wants to take some of these classes that you're teaching at Johns Hopkins, or some of these online courses, check it out. We'll put that up there so everybody knows. And
Great.
check
Awesome.
out your TED Talk and get back to podcasting. And thank you again. Just thank you so much.
Absolutely. My pleasure.